In the next two sessions, we'll be focusing on practical solutions to women's housing. I would like to introduce the fabulous Fiona Caniglia, the CEO of Q Shelter. Q Shelter works with members and stakeholders to improve housing outcomes for vulnerable Queenslanders. They provide products and services that build the strength and capacity of the housing and homelessness sector, along with working with regional networks and members to improve policies and programs responsive to the needs of people vulnerable to homelessness. Q Shelter works with government, the community sector and private sector to achieve solutions that make a positive difference. Please join me in giving a big warm welcome to Fiona.
Thank you very much, and it's an absolute privilege to be here. And I have to say, to see a slide with all of the partner organisations, genuinely exciting, and the sense of urgency in the room is warranted because we know their needs are so great. So this presentation today is about a service integration initiative in Queensland where we have worked to coordinate housing and support through strengthened place-based structures and alliances. And to begin, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we meet here, and certainly acknowledge traditional owners throughout Queensland where we operate across the footprint of the state, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So this initiative, I think we can say on the one hand, it emerged after some statewide consultation in 2019, but in fact, some of the first regional care coordination groups at the front line emerged in response to homelessness around 2010 in Queensland, and there are many other examples of such groups in other human services domains like mental health and aged care. But in 2019, Q Shelter was charged by the Department of Housing with a large program of engagement around the state. It was huge, it was exhausting, we went everywhere. And the engagement really revealed that the profile of those regions where care coordination groups were operational had started to be amplified, people had heard about it, and they really wanted to see some more intensive facilitation of integrated services on the ground in their regions as well. And this led, under the Queensland Housing Strategy, to an investment of regional facilitators and a backbone role across initially 9 regions, but it's just grown to 10. There was an initial demonstration period of a year to 18 months, and then the Queensland State Budget last year funded the initiative for another 4 years, so we're 1 year into that. Very exciting moment. So it's important to say that this is a collective impact model where, if you think about what actually happens most of the time as a result of this initiative, it's groups of frontline workers coming together to design responses for housing and support around the individualised circumstances of households. All of the roles employed by this initiative, though, are systemic roles. They work at the systems level. The facilitators don't have direct contact with people, households, individuals who require assistance. That is where the service system comes in. So in a sense, this initiative is there to support the system to be more effective and to overcome barriers to integrated practice, both in terms of housing provision and integrated wraparound support. I think it's very important to say that in addition to those regional facilitators, it is a collective impact model, and Q Shelter plays a backbone role. So we also have staff who help with data collection, data analysis, who provide all of the tools, resources, training and support. They facilitate communities in practice. They assist with regionalised regionalised training around the state, which is identified through the regions. One of the powerful things about people coming together is that they can collectively identify their training needs, and we've been able to broker in very, very low-cost trainers on topics that people haven't had access to before. So it certainly works primarily to assist households with better integration of service delivery and housing, but it is also probably somewhat unintentionally growing the capacity and capability of the sector by sitting around the table and trying to work things out that are really quite complex and often very lonely, but also trying to address the fact that it's hard to always have the level of support, capacity building, training, etc. that you need to do what are extremely complex roles. I suppose we could say, on the one hand, that these regional service integration groups are an example of regionalised infrastructure, if you like. It's about structuring up the support and housing sector, if you like, creating an additional level of structure which is intended to provide the opportunity for improved and rich dialogue about designing service delivery responses, both on the housing and support side. But they then become pieces of regionalised infrastructure that can lend themselves to other challenges. So these facilitators were hitting the ground just as COVID was escalating, for example, and each of the groups in existing locations and the new emerging groups quickly wrapped themselves around the problem of COVID, assisted people through outreach to come off the streets, and then also work one by one through the list of those households to identify and pursue an improved housing response. So if you think about Queensland, where there's cyclones, a lot of rain and floods and other things, this is infrastructure. It's a form of infrastructure that lets you say, well, if there's another challenge, you know, at the top of the hill or over the other side of the hill and we don't quite know about it yet, as infrastructure gathering pace and gathering strength, you can use it and deploy it to the next challenge that comes along. And there's a real reason to keep embedding input and support for these pieces of regionalised infrastructure, because it will help us to solve what the core business of the group is, but it might also help to assist in a situation where the deployment of these regionalised structures to some other challenge could be well and truly worthwhile. The other really important element, of course, is data collection. So we have a client information management system, which is it sits with the Department of Housing, which is great actually, because they see all of the data, they know what the data is telling them, they trust the data. It's delivered through a CMS that was designed by Info Exchange, so the sector's got good literacy with it. It's one step towards a kind of software enablement of better integrated service delivery. And what it enables us to do as well is produce data that tells us how are we going, not just individually as organisations, but collectively as a region. What are we doing well? What could we do better? Are we tracking in the right direction to increasingly solve and address the needs of households with complex needs? I won't go through all of this, but I will say that this is for us about people who are homeless, but also many of the referrals are for people at risk of homelessness. So it's not just working with people at a point of an escalated crisis, it's working with people as far upstream as possible to prevent homelessness in the first place. I'm really pleased to say that there's now just over 300 services or organisations that are connected to these groups around the state. At December last year, it had assisted 1,100 households, which was more like about 1,800 people. It's quite a lot higher now. We're just waiting for the June data to be published. A significant number of children were assisted. And I guess it really does prove that there is genuine complexity out there, and that one agency on its own, it's a challenge to address all of the needs that people have. So that not just a rationale to have the initiative in the first place, but the way the data is presented back to us shows us that the complexity is absolutely real. It helps us to affirm that we do need more assertive ways of bringing services together around these individual referrals. And the extreme vulnerability, not just that people experience in and of themselves, but the plunge towards homelessness increases vulnerability and complexity. So the rationale seems important. The initiative started with some active groups in some regions, as I said. So with those groups, of course, they had a head start, and the job of work was to work with those groups to improve their ability to, conduct those groups in a more professionalised way, to increase the systematic approach that they took and certainly improve the data collection. In regions where there were no groups, it was starting from scratch. It was going in with co-design workshops, working with the service system to figure out what that would look like in that particular region. So while there are some fundamental settings that apply across the initiative, there's an awful lot of value in allowing regionalised communities to interpret the fundamental settings of the program based on their own unique circumstances and the collection of services that they have. So while there's some central tenets that are really important, it is also unique in each region. And if this was to be replicated, I cannot imagine there being any other way to do it. You know, you have to let that regional diversity shine through. There's certainly data up until December last year that show about, well over 70% of closed households to the initiative achieved a better housing outcome. So that's a really positive thing. But housing markets are harder every single day. So what we're really interested in the data telling us now is if that number's getting lower, is that being driven by the housing supply issues, and do we need more of an escalation of systemic responses to that? Another example of how the data really helped is it showed 18%, which is a lot, of those households have disengaged from the services that referred to them. So this gives us a focus. We've now redesigned the information management system to give us much more detailed demographic information about those households who are disengaging, so that we can say, is it a practice issue? Are we not working with as much cultural competency as we need, for example, if many more Indigenous households are represented there? It gives us a chance to deep dive and understand what's really going on, but to do that collectively in a spirit of openness and transparency. I'll just skip ahead because I think we've covered some of that. I suppose what are the drivers? We all know the drivers, and I just heartfelt thanks to the earlier panel. I think there are definitely individual and systemic structural drivers for why an initiative like this is important. We know service systems are complex, and in fact they unfold rather than are designed. They unfold through all sorts of different negotiations and organic kind of thinking about what to do next. There's a diversity of funding bodies, service models, diversity of practices, and as a result of all of that, clients might experience a significant lack of consistency. There are definitely structural forces causing homelessness, like not enough homes, and those forces are getting worse. But there's also, at the organisation level, and this is my favourite elephant in the room to sort of open up the dialogue about, there's competition for resources and reputation and profile among the services. So there are different underpinning assumptions across all of that about the causes and solutions to homelessness. There's natural tension and many fault lines. And it's not until you bring people together in a supported, facilitated environment around the table, and it really is, my dad was Italian, it is like a long Italian table in a way, facilitating a community I keep forgetting to click this, I'm sorry, I'm reading it and thinking the world is me. But the complexity of our histories as organisations. I mean, I know I went to work for an organisation and there was some really a bit of natural competition with one other service, and I went back, it must have been 15 years later, to visit that service, and even new workers had been inducted to the historical conflict of those two organisations, and I was a heck of a lot older by then, and so was everyone else involved, but somehow in the culture of what we do, these natural tensions and fault lines, and we really need to draw this into the light. So you bring people around the table, and there are organisations that don't refer to each other because they don't want the data to present under that organisation's name. There are people who don't refer because they're a disgruntled former employee, or, there's all sorts of incredibly complex reasons why it isn't working at the front line. And some of it is absolutely resources and the design of structures, but we've got to own an awful lot more. That there are sometimes behaviours that reside at the level of practice, that through these mechanisms shedding a little bit of light on that and drawing it into the light for a transparent discussion with incredibly nurturing, facilitated support can make all the difference in the world to the quality of the dialogue and the levels of slowly building trust. I did it this time, I'll try and keep doing it. The initiative, if anyone's interested, I can send a lot more in a post pack, but we do have a program logic. It's very, very simple. We have a vision of a strengthened integrated service system with an absolutely primary focus on outcomes for those households. But the target group are the agencies for us. That's the initiative is targeting the agencies to then do a better job, and the data gives us that, that lens over how it's gone. Obviously, the outcomes are really at a systems level. Sometimes the data that's coming through will point to a really significant systems issue, and we've created and we use some pre-existing escalation mechanisms to take those issues up into the department or up into the senior echelons of these organisations and say, can't we solve this? If we can have some dialogue about this problem, we might be able to do something about it. So there is an escalation pathway to talk about the issues that are presenting, and the data really helps with that. But of course, the most important thing to measure is that it's making a difference for those households. I'll just jump ahead. We do have a couple of videos of this initiative, but we'll send it out in the post pack. I'd rather favour us having some time for questions. I do want to offer a critical reflection, because if this is sounding like it's got value, we've got to remember where it's located in the landscape of possible responses to all sorts of things that we know are problems and challenges. And I heard a wonderful critical reflection from Anthony Kelly, an internationally renowned community development practitioner and trainer. He talks about how community breaks down. You know, it is so many things pitted against the naturally supportive community connections that we have. And in some ways, that has been one of the things that's driven the formation of more formalised service systems. But then those service systems don't work perfectly. So then you introduce advocates to help make the system work. And then the system is so complex, we're also through NDIS and many other systems starting to see the introduction of navigators and facilitators to help access. So this initiative kind of sits at number 4, you know. But what is interesting to me is that we talk every day at Q Shelter about the community of practice we're trying to build in every regional location. So in some ways, we are trying to use the initiative to restore a measure of community and use community development methods to get us there. I might just jump ahead because I just want to be able to have time to talk to you about the 2 key roles. So the regional facilitators are a vital role. They become a system resource. They sometimes sit in auspice service delivery organisations, and 6 of the regions sit with Q Shelter, and this was part of co-design with the regions themselves. And these roles are critical. It's important probably that they know something about housing and homelessness solutions, but by far and away the most important skill set is developmental practice in the tradition of community development, because you need to engage people, you need to help them build their relationships with each other, and you need to be able to then help that move from relationships to structure, and from structure to capacity, and doing the work that you want to see done. So, you know, Tony Kelly talks about if you live in a place that you love, with people that you really care about, and you're doing things together that you believe are important, community and with it a sense of belonging starts to take shape. So I don't think we can underestimate that ourselves as practitioners need communities of belonging to tackle these really, really tough problems. Even, I hope, to mitigate some of the traumas that we accumulate from years and years and years of working with and you know, carrying our own experiences as well. So these roles are critical. And that developmental framework, I think, is an important guiding framework. So Tony Kelly would talk about the beginning of this being intentional dialogue, one-on-one, and then bringing people together so that by the time you have 3 people gathered around this particular set of concerns or opportunities, you have the same number of people as relationships, and the power starts to change. Because as soon as you add people and relationships, the people grow, you know, 1 + 1 + 1, but the relationships grow exponentially. And it's not like that big circle. Oh, you still can't see because I'm absolutely useless at this. I clearly need a lot of help with the technology. So if you see like that big circle in the middle, the idea that that's your facilitator, and they just have all these really powerful one-on-one relationships with the participants. Rather, what they're doing is facilitating the triangulation of many, many relationships so that you're building capacity. And it brings structure to the relationships by building these groups and giving them structural capacity. But effectively, the initiative's given us a chance to scale up, but also scale across the state. The other key role is the backbone support role. That's all about data collection, data reporting, producing tools and contributing to a really robust evaluation of how we go. I might move on. That's really just saying a little bit more about the diversity of participants. So it is not just specialist homelessness services and community housing providers, more than half the participants come from beyond those two sectors, which we consider an absolute triumph, because we're very often able to accept referrals in that prevent homelessness because it's perhaps an issue about sustaining an existing tenancy rather than a move that must happen. So it's been fascinating and it's extremely encouraging. We analyse many case studies as well, and that really does point to many practice and system solutions. So that's been another really important source of data to come out of the collective impact approach. And there's been many takeaways. Just to emphasise, you have to let each region be somewhat varied, but also have some central things that guide the initiative. The CMS is a really critical tool. The meetings are a mechanism, but in fact the initiative is working all the time to get the kind of behaviours of collaboration and integration occurring all the time, not just at the meetings, if you know what I mean. Certainly good evidence that housing outcomes have been achieved, and in each region we're slowly strengthening those escalation points. So if there's something outrageous, like a family will be separated, or there's more child safety involvement than we can get housing supports, for example, then we escalate that for, to a high level of seniority that we need to get a solution. So I just want to say that we have engaged in this work as a peak body, and I think it's a really good role for peak bodies to at least be involved in the backbone function. And if you think about our purpose to lead solutions to housing need and homelessness, we certainly work across two really externally facing strategic pillars. We try to influence policy and programs, and the data from this initiative is richly mined for what it needs to be in terms of influence and capacity. But the training and the community of practice has made an extraordinary difference as well. So thank you for listening. There's some more links and things in the pack, so if you want to pursue it further, we're always really happy to still haven't done it, sorry. Some links as well, but I hope there's a couple of minutes for some questions.
Thanks, Fiona. I'm Emma from Macaulay. Love your presentation. There's so much in there. 50 million questions, but I'll choose one. When you talk about the capability building that needs to happen and the critical nature of those facilitator roles, what kind of capability building did you have to do in your own team? And what kind of training? I mean, I hear you talking about community development frameworks and collective impact. What kind of training did you give those groups or that group of people?
I mean, I think there was some really pragmatic training about this is what the initiative is, this is how the groups need to work. So we do have a pack and a training product that is, this is what it is and this is how the groups need to operate, and this is some of the stuff you need to know. We've done structured facilitation training, like, not everyone's a facilitator, and this isn't just moving through a meeting agenda, this is getting the views out on the table, looking at which might be quite divergent, and then being able to skillfully facilitate a plan that's agreed to, because it's really revealed that people with different assumptions about what to do sometimes quietly go away, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to go looking in the private rental market for a home because everyone should get a social home, for example. So if you're going away, I'm not saying that either was the right solution, but if you're going away with different beliefs about what to do and they're not on the table and the plan really deeply agreed to, so that's the level of facilitation. This is not light touch. Now we're going to talk about this, so I can't underestimate that. And I would have to still say, and we would all be honest about this at Q Shelter, we're still a work in progress. It's very hard to recruit people with high order facilitation skills. And then the other thing that I would put in a plug for is, trying to make sure we help the facilitators understand reflexive and circular questions rather than just fact-finding questions. So, a blue sky circular question would be, imagine if there were no constraints right now, what would the plan say? And then, we'll end game it and let's reverse engineer what we have to do to make that plan happen, rather than how old are they, where do they go to school? Those fact-finding questions are important, but not nearly as important as circular questions that help the plan get broader and deeper. But that's hard to teach as well, and not everyone's got a natural capacity for that.
Hi, my name's Karen. While I was wondering, you're doing a lot of data collection. What sort of models do you have in place for cybersecurity? So that, you know, is the information all kept in Australia and servers here, or?
It's a wonderful question, and look, we've just done a big piece of work on privacy information, including working with lawyers and things to get the best information we can. You've always got to talk about this, you never resolve it once and for all. But in terms of the client information management system, it is part of an info exchange client information management system, which is used and adopted by governments everywhere with extreme safety in terms of information security. I think that the other side to it, though, is the art of informed consent from clients, because they can't be referred in without their informed consent. And you have to really attend to that. And that's actually another area of training we've done, is how to seek informed consent. But the info exchange server, well, the system, the platform sits within government and is subject to all the protection of information that any government has. Now, there can always be catastrophic problems, but you know, it's been very well designed to be as safe as it possibly can.
Thank you so much, Fiona. We'll give Fiona a fabulous example of collaboration for outcomes, and I know the work you do, Fiona, in Queensland has provided some big inspiration for our next session. And I was also telling Fiona before that my little sister Bryony, who lives in Queensland, who works for the Churches of Christ Housing Services, was raving about what Q Shelter do and how they provide amazing training. So I have heard lots of wonderful things about you before I got to come